In this episode, we begin with a topic that sounds formal and administrative at first, but quickly becomes one of the most practical tools an organization can use to understand what really matters when disruption hits. Conducting business impact analysis, BIA, is not just about filling out templates or creating a document for continuity planning. It is about learning which business activities are truly critical, how long they can be interrupted before damage becomes serious, and what people, systems, data, vendors, and facilities those activities depend on to keep running. For someone brand new to information security management, this topic is important because security incidents do not cause harm only by stealing information or triggering alarms. They also interrupt operations, delay services, create financial loss, damage trust, and force leaders to decide what must be restored first. In the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, mindset, the BIA helps turn those stressful future decisions into something more thoughtful and deliberate by building understanding before the emergency arrives. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to start is with the basic definition of a BIA and what it is trying to accomplish. A business impact analysis, BIA, is a structured process used to identify critical business functions, measure the consequences of disruption, and determine how quickly those functions need to be recovered or supported when operations are interrupted. That sounds straightforward, but the real value comes from the fact that it pushes the organization to look beyond technology and ask deeper operational questions. A business may believe everything is important until it is forced to compare payroll against customer transaction processing, or legal reporting against internal document sharing, or emergency communications against ordinary administrative tasks. The BIA helps leaders sort through those realities with more discipline. Instead of assuming all systems and processes deserve equal urgency, the organization learns where time matters most, where delays can be tolerated for a while, and where disruption quickly turns into regulatory, financial, operational, or reputational damage that the business cannot comfortably absorb. One of the most common beginner misunderstandings is confusing a BIA with a risk assessment. The two are connected, but they are not the same thing, and it is important to keep that distinction clear. A risk assessment focuses on threats, vulnerabilities, and the likelihood and impact of adverse events. A BIA focuses more specifically on what happens to the business when important activities are interrupted and how severe the consequences become as time passes. In other words, a risk assessment asks what could go wrong and how exposed the organization is, while a BIA asks what the business loses when certain functions stop and how fast that loss becomes unacceptable. Both support continuity and resilience, but they answer different questions. The BIA is especially helpful because it grounds security and continuity planning in business operations instead of in technical assumptions alone. A system may look important from a technical perspective, yet its actual business impact might be lower than expected, while a simple process supported by ordinary tools might turn out to be extremely time-sensitive and central to the organization's mission. That leads to the next essential idea, which is why a BIA matters so much in security and resilience planning. Security leaders are often asked to protect systems, data, and services, but protection is much harder to prioritize intelligently when the organization has not clearly defined what disruption would hurt most. The BIA provides that business view. It helps leaders understand which functions create revenue, support customers, satisfy legal obligations, protect safety, maintain trust, or enable the rest of the company to keep operating. Once those functions are identified and understood, the organization can make better decisions about incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, third-party dependency, staffing priorities, and control investment. Without a BIA, planning often becomes vague or politically driven, with each department claiming equal urgency. With a BIA, the organization gains a more disciplined way to say this process must be restored quickly. This one can tolerate a short delay, and this other one can wait longer without creating serious harm. That clarity is one of the most valuable outcomes of the entire exercise. When an organization begins a BIA, one of the first major tasks is identifying its key business functions and processes. This sounds easier than it really is, because businesses are full of overlapping activities, and people often describe their work in different ways depending on role, department, or level of detail. The goal is not to capture every tiny task someone performs in a normal day. The goal is to identify the meaningful business functions whose disruption would affect the organization's ability to serve customers, meet obligations, generate revenue, maintain compliance, or protect essential operations. A function might involve payment processing, patient scheduling, customer support, manufacturing control, order fulfillment, identity administration, or executive communications, depending on the type of organization. The BIA should focus on business outcomes rather than purely technical assets. That distinction matters because systems support functions, but leaders need to understand the function first if they want to know why an outage matters. If the organization starts with technology alone, it may end up recovering the wrong things first because it never fully understood what those systems were actually supporting. Once the important functions are identified, the BIA has to explore what kinds of impact follow when those functions are disrupted. This is where the analysis becomes more concrete and more valuable. Impact is not limited to one category, and beginners sometimes make the mistake of thinking only in terms of immediate financial loss. Financial consequences matter, of course, but disruption can also cause legal exposure, regulatory penalties, operational backlog, customer dissatisfaction, reputational harm, missed deadlines, contract failures, and even safety concerns in some environments. Some impacts appear quickly, while others grow over time as the disruption continues. A customer-facing system outage might create visible damage within minutes, while the interruption of an internal reconciliation process might take longer before the real consequences become obvious. The BIA helps the organization look at both the type and timing of impact. That time dimension is crucial because the same disruption may be manageable for 1 hour, difficult at 6 hours, and unacceptable at 24 hours. Understanding that progression helps leaders make smarter recovery choices under pressure instead of relying on guesswork. Time sensitivity is one of the most important ideas in ABIA because it helps distinguish what is merely inconvenient from what becomes genuinely damaging. A function does not have to be pleasant to lose in order to be considered non-critical in the short term. The real question is how long the business can tolerate the interruption before consequences become severe enough to demand urgent response. Some functions are highly time-sensitive because they support real-time operations, customer obligations, medical or safety needs, or financial transactions that cannot be delayed without immediate loss. Other functions may still be important, but can tolerate a longer interruption before the business experiences serious harm. This is why a BIA often leads to recovery time expectations, even if the analysis itself is focused on impact rather than on technical recovery steps. Leaders need to know not only what matters, but when it starts to matter in a way the organization cannot comfortably accept. Time-based thinking prevents a common problem in continuity planning, which is treating importance as a yes or no label rather than as something shaped by how long the disruption lasts. Another major part of conducting a BIA is identifying dependencies. Critical functions rarely stand alone, and this is one of the points where organizations often gain surprising insights. A business process may appear simple when described at a high level, but closer examination usually reveals dependence on applications, data stores, network connectivity, facilities, personnel, vendors, communications tools, power, approvals, and sometimes other internal processes that must occur first. For example, a customer service function may depend on identity systems, call routing, case management software, internet connectivity, trained staff, approved scripts, and third-party knowledge bases. If even one of those dependencies fails, the customer service function may not operate as intended even if other pieces still appear available. The BIA helps expose these relationships so continuity and recovery planning can be more realistic. Without this dependency analysis, organizations often believe a function is recoverable because one key system is available, only to discover during a real disruption that several supporting pieces were missing all along. In that sense, The BIA helps replace surface-level assumptions with a more complete operational picture. People are another dependency that deserves more attention than beginners often expect. Many business functions rely not only on systems and data, but on specific skills, approvals, judgment, and institutional knowledge that sit with certain individuals or teams. A process may appear documented and repeatable until a disruption reveals that only a handful of people truly know how to run it, approve it, or recover it properly. The BIA should therefore ask who performs the function, what roles are essential, whether backups exist, and whether special knowledge or authority is concentrated too narrowly. This matters because resilience is not just a technology question. It is also a workforce question. A business can have excellent technical recovery capability and still struggle badly if key staff are unavailable, if cross-training is weak, or if critical decisions depend on one person who cannot be reached. Good BIA work makes those human dependencies visible so leaders can think more carefully about staffing, succession, training, and process design before an incident turns those hidden weaknesses into operational delay. The BIA also helps organizations understand the relationship between business functions and supporting technology without reducing the analysis to an inventory exercise. Technology matters deeply, but it should be viewed through the lens of business impact rather than treated as the starting point for every decision. A single application may support several business functions with different levels of urgency, and one business function may depend on several applications that fail in different ways. That complexity is why the BIA is so useful. It helps the organization map systems to functions in a more meaningful way. Instead of saying this server is important because it hosts a popular application, the business can say this environment supports order fulfillment, invoice generation, and customer communication, which means its interruption affects revenue, customer trust, and operational backlog in distinct ways. This business-first mapping improves recovery planning because leaders are less likely to prioritize technology based only on visibility or familiarity. They can prioritize it based on the business consequences that follow if the technology remains unavailable for too long. Good BIA work also depends on gathering information from the right people. This is not an analysis that should be performed entirely inside the security team or continuity office without broader involvement. Process owners, department leaders, operational staff, technology teams, legal and compliance stakeholders, and sometimes vendor management or finance personnel all bring useful perspectives about how work is performed and what consequences matter most when disruption occurs. Interviews, workshops, and carefully structured questionnaires are common ways to collect this information, but the real skill lies in asking questions that move beyond general statements like everything is critical. People often describe their own area as urgent because they are close to it and understand its value. The analyst's role is to guide the discussion toward measurable business consequences, timing, dependencies, workarounds, and realistic tolerance for outage. That means challenging vague answers respectfully and asking what specifically happens after 1 hour, 1 day, or several days of interruption. Strong BIA results come from disciplined conversation, not from simply accepting the first broad claim made by each department. One of the most useful outcomes of the BIA is that it helps identify realistic workarounds and not just recovery priorities. A business function may be disrupted in its normal form, but still partially continued through manual steps, alternate facilities, simplified procedures, or reduced service levels. Those workarounds are important because resilience does not always require immediate full restoration of every system exactly as it was. Sometimes the organization can tolerate a degraded mode of operation for a limited period if essential outputs can still be produced. The BIA should therefore explore what alternatives exist, how long they are sustainable, and what limitations they create. This is valuable because it helps leaders understand whether a function truly stops completely when a system is unavailable or whether the business can continue in a slower, more constrained way while recovery proceeds. That understanding supports smarter continuity decisions and more realistic planning. It also reduces the chance that leaders will overreact or underreact during disruption because they already know which business activities have credible fallback options and which ones do not. The BIA plays a major role in shaping both the Business Continuity Plan, BCP, and the Disaster Recovery Plan, DRP, which is why it is often considered one of the foundation activities in resilience planning. The BCP depends on knowing which business functions matter most, what impacts must be avoided, and what alternate arrangements may be needed to keep operations going. The DRP depends on understanding which systems and supporting infrastructure must be restored first in order to support those critical functions. Without the BIA, both plans risk becoming generic or misaligned. The organization may spend too much energy preparing to restore visible systems that support lower priority work while under-preparing for the functions whose disruption creates the most severe business damage. The BIA also helps with incident response by clarifying what business consequences are likely to follow if certain systems remain unavailable. In that sense, it connects security, continuity, and recovery into a more coherent picture. It helps make sure that technical restoration priorities and business protection priorities are not drifting in separate directions. There are also several common mistakes that can weaken a BIA if leaders are not careful. One mistake is treating the exercise like a paperwork requirement rather than a genuine attempt to understand operational consequences. Another is accepting unsupported claims that every process is critical without asking what specific harm actually occurs and how quickly it appears. Some organizations focus too heavily on technology and forget to examine people, vendors, facilities, communications, and upstream or downstream process dependencies. Others complete the analysis once and never revisit it, even after major changes in business model, services, staffing, or architecture. Poor stakeholder participation is another frequent weakness because incomplete input leads to incomplete understanding. The most effective BIA work is disciplined, honest, business-focused, and periodically refreshed as the organization changes. It does not aim for perfection, but it does aim for enough clarity that leaders can make practical continuity and recovery decisions before disruption forces them to improvise under pressure with limited information. As we close, the central lesson is that conducting business impact analysis is really about teaching the organization how to think clearly about interruption before interruption occurs. A strong BIA identifies critical functions, examines the real consequences of disruption, considers timing, dependencies, people, systems, vendors, and workarounds, and gives leaders a more disciplined basis for continuity and recovery planning. It helps separate inconvenience from true business harm and turns broad opinions about importance into more useful operational understanding. For a new CISM learner, this topic matters because security management is not only about preventing bad events. It is also about understanding what the business must protect first when prevention fails and operations are under pressure. When a BIA is conducted thoughtfully, the organization becomes better prepared to prioritize recovery, allocate resources wisely, and preserve what matters most when disruption threatens to turn confusion into real business damage.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.